Hi everyone, I'm Michaela Berryman and today we'll be discussing Margaret Preston's Winter in Bendigo, the Alexandra Fountain, found in the Bendigo Art Gallery. Known predominantly for her woodblock prints and paintings, this work is quite different to what her usual practice of still life and Australian floral arrangements consists of, as usually her works are quite domestic and commercial, even playing around with cubism and a monochromatic colour palette of greys and blacks during the 1940s, before this painting was made. The oil painting captures the domestic life within central Bendigo during that era in time. Perhaps late afternoon after a long day of work, citizens waiting for their tram to arrive, or maybe even just enjoying the hum of the city. The main focus, of course, is the Bendigo Fountain itself, as it takes up quite a large portion of the painting, sitting directly in the centre. The composition of the fountain suggests that the painting is much more about the essence of the fountain, rather than the atmosphere of the city itself. The fountain, which is still present today, sits within View Street and McIver Highway in Bendigo, and although the infrastructure has changed around it, the actual fountain has been locked in time, looking exactly the same as it did back then in 1948, and even as far back as when it was unveiled in 1881. In 1948, you can imagine the sound pollution and ambience was much duller than it is today, more peaceful and quiet with perhaps just the sound of trams and a few vehicles. Now surrounded by lanes of traffic, ticking of walking signals, and busy pedestrians, the fountain seems to get lost amongst our busy world, although a reminder of the time that wasn't as fast-paced. The buildings have also changed. Most are still standing, especially the ones in the painting, but many that sit around the other side of the fountain have been bulldozed and rebuilt to suit the needs of the city as time has passed. As you can see in her light and quick brushstrokes, parts of the blue underpainting are peeking through, giving a sense of airiness to the image, addressing light subtly with shadows of structures and the sun reflecting off the fountain and its lights. The sun is hidden away behind the buildings, and although you can feel a sense of it, it is very much not focused on. Perhaps due to the weather since it was painted in winter, and also as the focus was on the fountain, not capturing the atmosphere of the city. There is not a lot of depth or refinement to the painting, as it is painted with rushed brushstrokes, adding character to the painting through its impressionistic and stylistic elements that Preston has adopted in her painting, establishing a rough texture and messy approach as if quickly executed. Even though she travelled widely throughout Europe and Asia, Margaret Preston strongly advocated a national style that was distinctive and reflective of Australian culture. Well-known modernist, her paintings aren't as frequent as her other works, which is interesting because they are also a completely different style to her other practices. This painting is very impressionistic, with a painterly, light-handed approach, juxtaposing her usual use of harsh black lines and colour blocking. She uses colour in a completely different way to create value and dimension through mixing and layering, although still a Preston work through a similar colour palette. There is no obvious narrative or moral lesson being told in this painting, merely just a scene from everyday life capturing a day in Bendigo. Quite like her still life prints, she apprehends the view of the fountain, surrounded by the people living around it in a passing moment. Perhaps painted on site, indicative of a quick-looking execution, short brushstrokes, and also the way Impressionists like to work. The vista overlooking the Alexandra Fountain feels peaceful and serene, even as there are quite a few people scattered around the fountain, presumably waiting for their tram. The angle looking down upon the fountain is intuitive to where Preston would have painted this image. As along McIver Highway, an old building that has now been replaced by the Bendigo Bank building is positioned there, surrounded by balconies where she would have indeed sat, to capture not only the fountain in its full glory, but to maybe avoid the sun shining in her eyes while looking up at the fountain constantly. Also a view that captures more than just the fountain, but parts of its surroundings, including the edge of the botanical gardens, the trams, and also the rows of old cars positioned in front of the buildings. The fountain also seems to be empty, without any water spouting from the top. Seeing as it is winter, it may have been turned off to protect the residents from getting wet whilst waiting for their transport. By analysing the movement painted in the clouds, it seems to be windy, which may have blown the water onto the people, also creating a problem. Due to the direction of the shadows, it seems to be afternoon, as I am familiar with the area and have seen the sun set over the CBD many times where I live. Maybe painted after a busy day of work, as people are going home to their families.